Today we're on Highway 4. Before we start our adventure of the old immigrant trails and roads, look at this beautiful mountain lion that somebody drew on the bottom of a fresh cut pine. Okay, this is Highway 4. This is basically paved over Emigrant Trail, which would come up this hill and then go around that bend. But in the Emigrant days, they didn't go around that bend. This was their path. So the highway bypassed this section, figuring it'd be easier to go around that bend. But the old pioneers would come up this section. Now, as they would come up these bumpy roads, horses, mules, and oxen would lose shoes. And as you walk these old immigrant trails, if you look down, you can find broken horseshoes and things like that. Now, when I was coming down this area, I was keeping an eye out for things. I found chunks of old wagon wheel. They're like little tiny pieces of metal which break off. But here's a pretty cool nail and a horseshoe nail. Sorry, I'm out of breath, but I just did some hiking. So these are visible laying on the trails. You're not supposed to take them home, but you can look at them. So I'm gonna hike back up to the top here. We're gonna get in the truck, and we know where there's another section off the beaten trail that we're gonna go explore. Okay, so back here, this is the Emigrant Trail that we're looking at now, though it's been graveled over. But it was important when the immigrants traveled that they had water sources. So you can see right alongside the Immigrant Trail here, you had a nice little pond with water that they could refresh and water their horses and mules, oxen. Okay, one thing you want to do when you're out exploring, looking for things along these trails, is to go off trail and look for evidence of the people that traveled these roads. This is a case that we found a few months ago. We've come back to look at it again. We don't know if the blue is graffiti from the present, but the brown writing on this rock was most likely where a group of people might have passed away at this portion of the trail. What do you think that says, Mitzi?
Well, the writing to the right, the brown writing, the numbers at the very top, just directly underneath that ledge, look like originally or initially 1905. But if you look at it from a different angle, it, I believe, says 1865 or 1855. It's important to look at these from different angles. And that date of the 1800s makes more sense. When you look off to the left of the writing, there's clearly an 1891. So I suspect those top numbers just underneath the ledge are probably a date of birth and then the 1891 date of death. Then we have Mrs. Thomas McCarty. Then we have Mrs. J.D. McCarty. And then underneath that we have, it looks like baby Agnes or Agner. And then below that, J.D. McCarty, I believe, most likely the husband of Mrs. J.D. McCarty. And I believe these writings here were placed by the immigrants to memorialize the death of these individuals, of this family. And it's remained all these years because it's been protected by this top ledge of the rock, and it hasn't been exposed to snow. The bottom portion that is eroded most likely was subjected to a lot of snow from storms that pushed the snow in there and then eroded some of that writing. And like you said, I believe the blue is probably some graffiti of somebody trying to replicate that writing, which is a shame. But just as surely as they traveled on this trail, they died as well. And it wasn't an easy way of life back then.
Mama, where we go? Yes, you can tell. And Mama, where's my daddy? I haven't seen him since our wagon went down that hill. I haven't seen him since our wagon went down that hill. According to the National Park Service, the Oregon, Mormon, and California Pioneer Trails have been called the nation's longest graveyard. Nearly 1 in every 10 died and did not survive. Cholera, smallpox, flus, measles, mumps, tuberculosis could spread quickly through an entire wagon camp. Cholera was the main scourge of the trail during these times. Shootings, drownings, and being crushed by wagon wheels were common killers on the trail. Wagon accidents were the most prevalent. Both children and adults sometimes fell off or under wagons and were crushed under the wheels. Okay, we've traveled down a little bit down Highway 4 and have found a couple more sections of the Emigrant Trail, so let's walk up and check this out. Okay, as you get in this area, we've been up here before, and you have to remember the trees we now see growing on these trails were not here 150 or 200 years ago. But once again, this is another section of a road that the pioneers used to get over this pass. Okay, further up the trail here, we discovered what we think is maybe grooves in this rock from the old wagon wheels. And I'll bet you anything, if we dug right below it, you'd find little pieces of metal fragments from the wagon wheels.
What are you going to do?
Look and see if there's any chunks there. Horseshoe nails. We are no experts in any way, but in all the years that we have explored these trails and roads, we have noticed that below possible rock grinding of wheels, you will find these little chunks of metal. Now let's take a look at an oxen shoe. A lot of people don't know much about it, but an oxen has cloven hooves and they take 2 per hoof, so you would need 8 per animal versus that horseshoe where you'd only need 4 for a horse. Now you can see the size difference on these 2 particular animals. That oxen shoe set is not a match set, but you can see the size of an oxen's foot. Now in these oxen shoes, you can see that they have a raised area here and here. This is a very large shoe. This is a smaller one. It has a little lip there and a little one there. Now these were to provide, they were called calkins, and they were to provide more traction for the animal. So I think in theory how it would work, this is the bottom of the shoe that would come in contact with the mountain, is it would dig in there and then kind of push its way up. And that would also give him traction coming down. He could kind of like scoop up and slow down easier. So on the horseshoe, if you can see here how worn out that tip is, that horse was really digging in, pulling those trailers up those hills. So these animals were really spectacular in what they accomplished. I'm sure they lost a lot of animals in this harsh environment. Now, shoeing a oxen is totally different from shoeing a horse, where you would just lift up a foot, remove that old crappy horseshoe, and put on a new one. But with an oxen, if you lift up one of his feet, he'll fall over. They are incapable of standing on 3 feet. So they developed different methods. They would tackle the thing down on the ground and tie all 4 feet to a pole and then shoe them. Or they made hoists, where they would hoist them up, take the weight off the other 3 legs, and then continue on with the shoeing. It is said that the emigrants would use axle grease to carve their messages into the granite. Here's another example that we have discovered along these trails and roads. It is clearly a message. Most likely someone passed away in this area near 1880. This rock contains what is known as graffiti in today's standards, but maybe in the future, those who gaze upon it will look at it as an historical message from the past. Now let's head over to the Devil's Ladder on Carson Pass, right off of Highway 88. We will be observing some more of what some people call pioneer graffiti. Okay, we're up now where the immigrants took a break 100 and something years ago, and they wrote on the rocks. Now, this is Highway 88 Carson Pass. Earlier in the video, I showed you some writings from Highway 4, which were still in their natural state, which means that the color of the writing was in the color of axle grease. These colors were wearing out, so the Oddfellows rewrote them in white, right, Mitzi?
That is the story that's been told.
And who in the heck the Oddfellows are, we don't know, but we're going to try to find out. So anyway, let's keep exploring. Okay, it's hard to research the Oddfellows at this point, but what we believe is it was the Oddfellows that originally scratched their names in grease on these rocks, and the Oddfellow organization still exists, I think out of San Francisco, and they do come out here periodically and refresh the writings in white, though it looks like they haven't been here in a long time. Today's Highway 4 pretty much follows the old Emigrant Trail over the Sierra Nevadas. It was improved in 1855 and 1856. And in 1860 it was known as the Big Tree and Carson Valley Turnpike. Originally there was no fee for this trail. It became a toll road from 1864 through 1910, and then in 1911 it was once again free. The tolls were as follow. Pack animals were 25 cents, goats and sheep were a penny, horsemen, if you had them with you to help, they were 25 cents each. Loose cattle and horses were 8 cents, and if you had a horse in a vehicle, that would be 40 cents. These wagon trails were very rough, full of rocks and holes. So riding in a wagon was very uncomfortable. It is said that most immigrants would walk alongside instead, unless they were sick. Many settlers on some of these wagon trails would walk the full 2,000 miles of trail. A wagon would typically travel 15 to 20 miles in a day. But when you got into this type of terrain, travel was much harder. The miles would be less per day. I think the pioneers would be in disbelief if they saw how we now travel on their old pioneer roads. The first dusting of snow has occurred on Highway 4, as well as Highway 88 and 108. So as the seasons change here in California, we look forward to next year in spring. Once again, we will be out here exploring these beautiful immigrant trails. We hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching California Outdoor Adventures.